and planning commissioners.
I have a question through the chair.
Yes.
As to how we go forward with the actual motion or motions. I'm looking at table 1 on page 12 of our packet. And maybe it's the staff, if staff needs to answer, but I'm going to ask it through you. Will we go through each one of these with a separate motion, or should we go through each one of these with a separate motion, or are we going to lump them all together and put all the exceptions in and try to make this one motion? I don't recommend it.
I think we have a lot to discuss, and maybe that procedural question will be more obvious at the end of it. You know.
Okay.
We can attempt to be comprehensive, but it may break down into subparts.
Through the chair, I have a suggestion. What I've had prior planning commissions do is, if there's, because there are 13 amendments that are being proposed and maybe some others that'll be proposed from dais, you can do straw polls on each proposed change, so that when you get to the final decision you may make tonight, that you've got one motion to adopt the resolution, but you'll incorporate some of the things that you've already agreed to or had a consensus on.
Thank you. I'll endeavor to do that.
I guess I'll chime in. So there's obviously a lot to grapple with and deal with here, and you know, the top line issue is the floor area ratio and how to go about slicing that. We have a staff recommendation. We have a lot of good input from the public. So it's a tough one. I guess one, and then there's a lot of detail I think we have to get to as well, as far as exclusions and garages and some others. Just to kind of kick off the conversation on the floor area ratio, I thought it might be useful if I just made the case for the staff recommendation as a devil's advocate kind of thing. I think there is some thoughts perhaps of not going in this direction, but let me just state it out there, and then it'll at least give us something to bounce off of. So a 0.59 flat FAR is the staff recommendation. As Al said, they've lived and breathed hundreds, if not thousands, of San Carlos planning cycles, and this is their recommendation. San Carlos might be unique. We do have more small lot sizes. The sliding scales we've looked at do impact the small lots more, and perhaps penalize large lots, and that isn't necessarily what has caused concern here. A 0.59 flat FAR actually represents a very significant 37% reduction in building envelope. You could argue that's a lot, and for any government change, how drastic do you want to be as a first iteration? You could argue that's a good start and adjust from there as we see more data points going forward. I don't think it would be hard to revisit this issue in the future if we needed to. And I think we'll learn pretty quickly whether this is enough or not and adjust further from there. So I don't even know if I agree with all that, but I think that's the case I would make if I was arguing for a 0.59 FAR, but I do see merit in being a bit more flexible and looking at these other options as well. But I thought it would be useful to at least make that case, since that is the staff's recommendation.
Thank you.
You know, are we on? Yeah, good. John, thank you. I think, you know, one of the lenses that I was looking, was trying to get specifically out of the FAR for a couple of the tiers and look at the house size, just as a different lens. And, you know, there's been a lot of conversation around what everybody else other than San Carlos and Redwood City do. And, you know, one of the things that you know, it's interesting to look at is you pick Menlo Park for a 5,000 square foot lot. You come up with 2,800 square foot. You look at what is recommended by staff, it's 2950. Okay, you know, for me, shaving a point, if the objective is to look like an adjacent community, my picking up on your point, 0.59 in that scale of lot might not be all that bad, actually might be the right outcome. So again, this isn't sort of saying I'm fully aligned with staff on 0.59, but what strikes me is on our 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000 square foot lots, the smaller FAR doesn't seem in keeping with the how does it look compared to other communities as an important lens that everyone's been voicing. So I guess what does that say? It says I'd like to hear what the other commissioners' thoughts are as well, and it strikes me that a larger FAR for the smaller lot feels important, and if staff, and therefore can align around staff's 0.59 in those smaller lots.
Well, I'll have to disagree. I would hope we would be willing to lower the FAR and the lot coverage could be left at 5.0. And I base that mostly on not to disagree with my fellow commissioners or the staff who I have the highest of regard for, but based on what I hear from the property owners, longtime residents, and the citizens of the City of Good Living. I hear what all of you have said, and I interpret that way. I believe I've been a planner for over 50 years. I plan for cities, big and small, counties, a country in Africa, and I've learned, well, I went to architecture school first, and we didn't have to listen to citizens in that context. But in planning school, I was taught, and I learned in the field that you just listen to people that live there. You know, it's not, you may think you have the smartest of ideas, but the citizens can usually prove that they know more about living in that community than someone just because he has a professional degree and may not even live in that community. Of course, we all live here, and that's why we want it to remain the City of Good Living.
Well, so Don, is there one of these options that struck you as more appropriate?
Well, I'll go back. I favored, I went to some of the SHAC meetings, and I would have favored the form-based idea. The minutes reflected that we thought it was too progressive or too complex. If you look at the zoning ordinance the way it is right now, it's nearly 200 pages, or maybe more than that. It's very complex the way it is, and whatever we do, it's going to be complex. I appreciate what I've heard from the audience and the citizens and residents of the community over the past year now, and all the work that the staff has done, which I think has been very professional and very helpful, as well as the consultant that they picked to do the work. And now we have to come up with the hard decision what to make. I would prefer to see something like 5.0 to 5.5 in that area. But I do prefer the sliding scale, and I think a lot of good ideas have come out over the months and here in the last 2 hours or so about basements. And one thing I haven't heard, architects doing creative design, solving problems, could consider story-and-a-half houses that would protect the daylight plane and privacy somewhat. by, you know what I mean, like the old Cape Cod houses. I know nobody wants to build them now, but, or Tudor houses, for example, where you've got a second story, but it doesn't look so imposing from the street or from your neighbor's backyard or a side yard. I'm in favor of most everything else that's been said about 2 to 1 in driveway car preferences there. The thing is, the San Francisco Bay Area has a huge housing problem because we're so highly paid here. That has increased rents and purchase prices of houses. I've lived here 33 years, not as long as some of you, but longer than others. And in 2 places, I chose to live when I wanted a bigger place. I still stayed here because I knew it's a good government kind of town. I've said that before I got on the Planning Commission. One of the things that impressed me when we updated the plan, and I wasn't on the commission then, it's been 10 years ago, nearly a decade ago, and I saw yard signs in people's yards saying, support the update of the plan. It blew my socks off because mostly I remember people carrying signs around at public hearings saying, planning is communism, you know, vote the rascals out, that sort of thing. So we've evolved over these years, and I know we'll make the right decision for the town if we consider all these things. But I would be in favor of lowering the FAR and lot coverage.
Well, I think that we need to be very careful to listen to our constituents, and we've been hearing a pretty consistent opinion that we need to implement the solution that actually has an impact, and at 0.59 is close to the size of the existing problem houses, and so staying at that level doesn't solve the problem. The FAR is somewhat of a blunt instrument. I'd love to see the RDRC be able to exercise more judgment to ensure good context, neighborhood context for developments, but we don't have the opportunity to build that in right now. And so looking at what can we do right now, I would think that moving forward with an FAR in the lower 50s, I'm concerned about the smallest lots, and so adjusting the sliding scale, and so I don't see in the city proposal one that exactly matches what I'm thinking, and I suspect a few other commissioners are thinking, but something on the order of a 0.53 median. And because our neighboring cities have that sort of a median, it gives us some comfort that that's a workable place to be, that we're not trying to impose something that would be unduly harsh on people who want to expand their homes.
Thank you.
I think my mind has changed probably 10 or 15 times just sitting here. There's 2 things that I like. I like good growth proposal. I also like John Stewart's proposal. I'm a little bit concerned about clipping the small lots just because of and I'm thinking the 40 to 50 foot lots specifically. Just because there's not a lot of flexibility for them. And I remember the one gentleman talking, and I noticed that growth's got it flat through there. So I'm really torn on that portion of it, but I like the 0.53 median. I can definitely go with that. And I don't know how I would vote if I had to go with a flat the flat portion of the smaller lots, or if we were to scale it. I'm torn on that. And that's really all we're discussing right now as far. I have other things to say, but I'll wait till we get to the other things. Could you put up the slide from Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, I'm certainly not opposed to considering a lower FAR, but as I do stare at the impact on our smaller lots, that is my concern. It almost feels like we need a bonus on the small lots, and then I also have a question on whether we want to be heavy-handed on our 9,000, 10,000 foot lots, because no one has presented that as a particular issue. So I don't want to be capricious with a large reduction on a problem that hasn't been identified. So I don't know the right formula to achieve that, but that's what I'm feeling on this.
Thank you. All right, so I share, it's like, what's the right number? And frankly, I don't think we're going to be too far off if we get somewhere in this, somewhere between the orange and the blue. Anyway, I could be convinced either way, whether it's good growth or whether it's Stewart and Associate. And I don't know if anyone else has an opinion or wants to do it differently. I also, if we want to grant a little bit of bigger on the larger lots, I'm fine with that. So, but somewhere around 0.53 is where I'd like to be. I'd accept anything between 0.50 and 0.55, like our chair has mentioned. But 0.3 is where ideally I'm at, and then we just need the discussion about the top end.
One of my general reactions is I do hesitate to be heavy-handed here in the sense that I don't think this completely solves the problem. And whatever we do here, I think prioritizing or recommending City Council prioritizes the RDRC reforms needs to be a priority, because I think that's what solves this. So kind of, I hesitate to, jam in a 55, like if 0.59 is a 37% reduction, I don't know if we've even figured out what a 0.53 reduction is, but it probably feels more like, 48%, nearly 50% reduction. I mean, that's drastic government action, right? You could argue. There's different perspectives on that, but it's just not obvious to me you can't still build a really obnoxious house at 0.53. So it's the RDRC, I think, really is the potential solution at hand.
I'd like to see the RDRC definitely have the teeth to do something about the light. I definitely want to give them that kind of, I'm sure there's other things we can think of, but that's definitely one thing I'd like to see addressed, and I think it should be addressed through the RDRC. Because I think it's going to be hard to be able to put a limit, or I think it's going to be hard to put a limit, or other than the 5-foot setbacks and 9-foot setbacks that we already have that protect a lot of the light plane, but not enough of the light plane. So I'd like to say, especially if we have solar coming down the road, and I don't particularly know how we're going to solve the solar issue on the roofs. I mean, I think that I'm repeating myself now, but I definitely think that the RDRC should have that power.
One of the things to highlight when we look at the Stewart Associates graph is it actually starts above 0.59, and I'm presuming, well, I'm not sure what the lot area, or what the 3,000 square foot lot would be if the intent would have been to make it flat at 0.6. So in some ways, it is an upward modification of what the good growth team have proposed, and to maybe what a couple of folks have said, not being so aggressive at the upper end. I mean, if we looked at the percentage of lots in San Carlos that were distributed along this bottom axis, that would really inform where the decision is that we're making. You know what I mean? You know, I think a couple of folks have said, well, most of our lots are in the smaller lot area. You know, if at the end of the day, from 8,000 square foot up, we're only talking about 15% of the properties, I'm making it up, of course, then the real conversation is, what impact do we want to have in the 4,000 to 7,000 square foot range? And I don't know if staff would have a view in 4,000 and 5,000 and 6,000, how much of the city properties line up, or just a swag, how much of the city properties line up in those areas? Like, so therefore, what are we really talking about?
Based on our last presentation, let me see if I can actually give you some numbers, but there's a significant number of lots that are in the smaller range. Let's see, we have about, under 50, we have nearly 3,600 lots, and then under 60 feet wide, which would be the 6,000, we have about another 14 or 1,500. So the majority of lots are under 6,000. If you take a look at the total number, parcel width 60 to 70 is 894, and then over 71 you have 2,000 parcels. So the majority of lots is less than 6,000 square feet. There's a total of 7,957 parcels, and 5,019 are less than 60 feet wide.
Can you say that second number again?
Out of 7,957 parcels, 5,019 are less than 60 feet wide.
Yeah, so the single garage option is actually going to be quite commonly an option.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Which is sort of one of the few form-based ideas that we're still carrying forward. And with the single car garage option, it makes me more comfortable with the lower FAR because we've given back the option to capture some square feet by giving up one of the two car spots in your garage.
So I probably am a little rough with the percentages, but almost 70% of the parcels in the city fall, if again looking at this graph, fall in the 4,000, 5,000, and 6,000 square foot range. So therefore, you know, the deep thought we need to have is, are all of these lots created equal, and what is big on lots of those size? Because I think beyond that, you know, it's really not, it's not going to be the scale of the development, the number of applications, and the number of people that are impacted. And, you know, I was struck by Mr. Stewart's claim or a view that from his perspective as an architect and actually also Una thinking about the smaller lots needing a bigger ratio just because it doesn't result in a floor plan or a footprint. And the gentleman that's sitting over here, in his own personal experience, I don't know if 25 or 2,800 is 2,900 is the right number, but again, I'm just mindful of what can be built on those smaller lots and don't want to disadvantage people in that space where it's really important. So
in theory, or not in theory, in concept, agree with that, but the one thing that I really, really struggle with, and I am trying to decide whether or not it's a showstopper for me, and I'm only 1 out of 5 votes, but is anything that would encourage people to put a car in the road or on the side of the road instead of in their driveway or their garage. So I have a strong problem with the 1-car garage, although I like it in theory. If we didn't have off-street parking or on-street parking issues, I'd be all over it. I think it's a really good idea, but there's so many areas in San Carlos where parking on the street is a problem that it's almost a showstopper for me. I don't know if it is or not, but it's close.
Well, Shannon, on that, I agree. I wouldn't want to put any more cars out on our street either, but I'm not aware of anyone, given with one driveway, we've already specified that have to be 2 side-by-side parking spaces in front of the single-car garage. So there's still room for 2 off the street. And I'm not aware of anyone who puts 2 cars in a garage and yet uses their driveway. I don't know if you're aware of that. So I think preserving 2 spaces in front of a 1-car garage, I think, do you have a concern about that?
Preserving 2 spaces in front of a 1-car garage?
That's what staff has proposed here, yes.
No, I think I'd probably be okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not to get off track on the parking, but just going back, so as I look at the curve and I see it better preserves the small lot area, I like this 1,000 plus 35% lot area proposal. It does make sense to me. My one hesitation is it does seem to have a large effect on our larger lots, just mathematically. That's just an observation. And that is not specifically a problem. I've really heard that we're concerned about building on our larger lots. It sounds like the small lots where 2-story homes start to really overhang is the big concern we're addressing here. So I guess, that's my only hesitation. Otherwise, on the lower levels, 8,000 feet and below, I think that's a really good ratios there. But I guess I'd have a question for staff. So I hesitate to put some big limitation on big lots if that's not a problem we need to solve here. But let me just ask, that's kind of a mathematical observation. When I look at it, boy, a 5,200 square foot house, I'd love that. That's 3 times the size of my house, So do we actually get, would that actually restrict what people want to do, this 1,000 plus 35 on these, 9,000, 10,000 foot lots? Or is that going to meet most people's needs on these larger lots?
I mean, generally, I think that it would meet most people's needs. I think we heard from one architect that's, everybody has a subjective opinion about that, right? So some people want a 3-car garage. They may want, a detached living area or whatever. So could you do all that in 5,200 square feet? I suppose you could, or I guess at 4,500 square feet in John Stewart's table there. So it's difficult to say. So generally, you could do a decent sized house. I guess from a staff perspective, what we see a lot is on the smaller lots in the 5,000, 4,000 square foot range. And you heard from one gentleman this evening. I know it's a minority opinion. However, I think he's right that it's very, very challenging to get, everything you need for a family of 4 with a garage in 2,100 square feet. Really tough to do. And we noted that in the staff report. So of any of the concerns, I guess the staff's key concern is more for the smaller lots.
Well, see, now I've changed my mind again. Because now, I don't know. I mean, I'm really concerned about the gentleman. I'm concerned about everyone, but, when you hear both sides of it, you start to, it gives you pause. And I don't want someone so restricted that they can't have, I mean, all they're getting is 2,000 square feet, right? Even with the 0.59 FAR under your standards, and frankly, 2,000 square feet's not that much if you have a family. I mean, if you don't have a family, maybe it's good if you're just a couple, but if you have even one child, that's a pretty low amount of square feet in living area.
I think the one thing that is, I mean, if you look at the 0.53, for instance, for a 4,000 square foot lot, you get 2120 according to option number 5 there. And the one thing that kind of makes that work is if you do exempt the porch, because right now we include porches in that square footage, and that it would be very challenging for somebody to do. But and I think also in terms of living area and also for the facade to look better, porches are a better thing architecturally. They open the house to the street, they're more inviting, it's better for community, and it adds a lot of articulation in the front of the house. So I think it kind of makes the 0.53 work a little better if the porch is exempt. So you end up with 2,120 square feet of living area, but then again, then you have your garage taken out of that, which is going to be 275 square feet. So that's where it gets a little bit challenging, and that's where the 0.6 looks pretty good. It's a little bit at the smaller lot level. The 0.6 gives you a little bit, or a 0.59 or something like that at the smaller lot level, makes it work a little better if you're going to go with a sliding scale.
Does it sort of correct itself at 5,000? I mean, when does it sort of correct?
I think you're probably right. About 5,000 square feet is where it gets easier to do. Things get more workable, especially with the porch being exempt and decks and things like that.
John, a question. You are talking about the larger lots. Could you envision the concept of 1,000 plus 35% going flat at some point? Like pick a square footage of lot area, instead of having the FAR continue to decline, have it go flat in somewhat reflecting staff's reflection to give the larger lots a little more elbow room, and simultaneously accommodate this conversation we're having around the smaller lots.
Yeah, it's a very good thought, Jim. It strikes me that, on one hand, I really do compliment good growth. For, 2 weeks ago, it was a 50%, right? That's what you guys were recommending, and you guys really thought through it, obviously looked at the large lots, and, coming back around at 53%, on the current proposals, a big movement from that. But it occurs to me that 50%, I don't think anyone was uncomfortable with, right? I mean, 50% seemed like a good limit. So I don't know, maybe that 1,000 plus 35%, no less than 50% is a good idea.
I think that's 1,000 plus 35%, no less than 50%?
Yes.
I'm just worried about the small, Al, can you tell me again how many were around the 4,000 square foot?
Let's see.
Between 4 and 5?
But this proposal actually is more generous to those than even staff's recommendation.
You're looking at
So this would be the Stewart Associates recommendation,
Right.
so you'd be at 0.6 at
Okay,
4,000.
never mind, Al.
Draw a flat line at 0.5. If you were to go to the 7,000 and push that little dot, I'm just going to say up to 50, and then draw it horizontally from there, I think that's what John is suggesting as a consideration.
I kind of
I
have
mean, you know, further study could certainly be done, but just looking at the graph, that seemed to satisfy what I was concerned about.
Yeah, I think, I still think my first choice would be John's, and then my second would be good growth. I really don't want to trunk off the people with the really, really small lots and making it hard for them to build or remodel.
So, so we're saying John's recommendation, but then not going all the way down to 43 on the big lots.
Saying stop at 50?
Yeah.
Okay, so at 7,000, basically, we're staying at 50. 50 on down. 7,000 on up, excuse me. 7,000 on up. We're staying at 0.5.
Right. I mean,
Okay.
that's what we're kicking
All right,
around.
I can buy
here.
that.
And we're talking about, I think Al suggested we're talking about 20% of the properties in the community.
Yeah. Now that I get
So
my,
he'll correct my rough math, but
pardon my low blood sugar.
About 45%.
No, I agree. I like that, actually. I like it because it protects the smaller lots, and then it doesn't clip the larger lots, and I really don't want to do either. So I actually can get behind that.
I'm sorry, through the chair, about 45% of the lots are less than 5,000. We don't have the exact number of 4,000 square foot lots, but it would be 3,576 parcels that are less than 50 feet wide.
Okay.
I'm not too worried about the larger lots because it's a smaller fraction and I think lower impact. Personally, I don't really like seeing inflection points in the curve because that is sort of some unfairness if you happen to be on one side or the other of the point. But I think we have to be careful at the small lot size if we go all the way up to 0.6, as in the Stewart Associates plot here, that we may be asking for trouble with oversized homes looming. I mean, that's exactly where the problem houses are. And so if we, you know, in the 4,000 square foot lots, it could be an imposition on the neighbors. And so 0.6 seems a little high to me for the smallest lots, but I wouldn't need to hold all the way down at 0.53 necessarily as in the good growth, somewhere in between.
maybe just to build on that, I think that's a good point. Would staff be able to say, in the past couple of years, in this under 5,000 square foot lot, what size of houses have been built, or what are the sizes of the houses that have led us to this point?
So I have data over the last 10 years. Unfortunately, it's not very complete because I don't have the lot size associated with it, but I can tell you that there's 29 homes that were over 0.59 out of 94 homes. 40 homes were over 0.54 out of 94 homes. And then just to remind you that we do have some quite lovely estate-sized properties, kind of Upper Eaton and up in the hills. So just for example, there was one house that was 6,858 square feet, resulting in a 15% floor area. So there's some very large properties out there, just to keep that in context. 6, 7. So in that same period, 7 homes were over 5,500 square feet with very low FARs, like 20%, 30, 16% FAR. So there's some very large properties.
Thank you. So that really speaks to David, to your point that, you know, maybe it's not 0.6, maybe it's 0.59, maybe it's 0.58. There's a way to acknowledge and pull back, and frankly, without, yeah.
And if we implement the exclusion of the covered porch, personally, I'd like to see maybe implementing that, but maybe with a limit on the square footage, but so that it doesn't get out of control, then that helps compensate somewhat for the restrictive FAR. So on one hand, I'd sort of like to knock off these one at a time, but on the other hand, there's some interconnectivity in that if we're going to be restrictive on the FAR, you give some breathing room in other areas to provide a good solution.
Yeah. No, thank you. And we probably should turn to these other items, but before we do that, I mean, it sounds like we have some growing consensus on this Stewart Associates, the 1,000 plus 35% lot area capped at 50. Do you have, like, is there a different way you would slice that, David, or?
I mean, I don't see why we need to let the houses get ever larger on the largest lots. I mean, why we need to suddenly flatten the curve and let those houses get really big on the big lots.
I can see it from a property value standpoint, right? I mean,
I'll take that as a point. One, I'm sort of imagining you can have a row of houses, maybe with the same street width, but some of the lots go back farther, so suddenly you would have a very large house sitting next to smaller houses just because of the depth of the lot. And so just sort of ungating unlimited size as you get into the larger lots makes me
I would just, I mean, we're not ungated.
deal breaker for me, because I think the biggest part of our impact is going to be in the 6,000 and under square lots.
And I would just say we're not unleashing anything. I mean, that's still a dramatic pullback of what they can currently do, a 50%, right? I mean, they can do much more than that today. So really, that represents a significant reduction in their planning envelope. But yes, a larger lot can have a larger house.
Yep.
do we have a picture? I know in our last packet we had pictures of the actual lots in San Carlos and the relative sizes. Do we have that available? Because I'm thinking about what you were saying, and I'm wondering how.
We're going to check that out and see if we have that. One other consideration that was mentioned earlier and that we noted in the staff report is other constraints, like one constraint that wasn't mentioned was hillside areas, and it's unlikely that on a hillside lot in excess of 20%, you're going to be able to max out your square footage because of the cost and the difficulty of digging into the hillside and things like that. So there are some other physical constraints that are limiting factors on larger lots.
And Al, are those still subject to a special waiver process of some kind, or have we lost that? Like if someone does have an odd lot, you know, something steep or something, is there still a mechanism where they can say, hey, you know, I'm a little out of bounds here, but it's necessary?
They have some special provisions in the hillside overlay, so they can move the garage much closer to the street and things like that. So there is a recognition that they are different. So yes, there are some special provisions for those lots. There we go.
There.
Next one.
Yeah.
Next. There we go.
That's the one. So the ones, I mean, it looks like it's, and they're pretty close in size. I mean, when you get up in the hillside, you get with the 61 and above, 71. But down in the flats, it's less than 50 up to about, you know, up to the 60.
If someone were to walk in the room right now, this would all seem like our speeches would be disjointed and in conflict, but I truly sense that we're aiming toward a consensus and compromises on all our parts, favoring parts of the staff recommendations, John's ideas, and good growth, and all of you that have spoken, I believe. I'm sorry I can't read that.
Since I'm not allowed to speak.
John, you had said there were a couple of other things. You had mentioned basement, and I'll tee up the rear setback. So maybe there are a couple of other things that we could actually help collectively and see if we're in the suggestion of straw poll, see if we're aligned. So did you want to?
Sure, yeah, that sounds good. There's a list here. But yeah, I'll just, no particular order, but we should recognize what we're doing here is a major change. So our code currently today calculates a floor area ratio. You can go into our code today and be instructed on how to calculate that. The reason that's in the code is anything over 4,000 or a 0.4 triggers the RDRC review. So there's some quirks introduced there because it's not a planning guideline, it's more of a trigger point. So there's a couple things that, as I read it, I wanted to flesh out then that don't make sense if they become kind of hard planning guidelines that maybe did make sense if all they did was triggered a further review. So one thing I saw was basements. I like basements. I grew up in a community where almost every house had a basement. Basements are great. They don't impact neighborhoods particularly. Whether there's water issues or not, basements everywhere can flood, and there's real straightforward engineering solutions to that, but that's not what we're solving here. We're trying to think, are there ways we can allow more building to meet a family's needs that doesn't impact the neighbors? That's what we're trying to solve. Basements are a nice solution to that because they don't impact neighbors. They don't increase the massing of the house. And you can also argue they do other things as well. If you go to other parts of the country, people actually park cars in their garage. You'd be amazed. And the whole reason they can do that is because they have a basement that they can put all their crap in. So everything you see in your garage today would be in a basement if you had a basement, and you might even park in that garage, believe it or not. That is most of the rest of the country. I think basements are something we should allow for. And so right now our floor area ratio calculation excludes basements, but only if they're completely below grade. And I've never seen a basement completely below grade anywhere else. That's just, it's kind of quirky. I don't know why that's in our code, to be honest, because basements are generally about 2 to 3 feet above grade, so there are some baseline windows there, and light is allowed into the basement. There's fire escape if necessary. And this does not affect the massing of the house to come out of the floor a little bit because we still have our maximum heights. We're not proposing any change to that. We're just saying if we're going to exclude basements completely below grade, let's just change that to exclude basements that are up to 3 feet above grade, like most basements are around the country.
Just a pressure test that if you have a 3-foot strip along the front of the house with windows in it, suddenly your 2-story house can start looking a lot like a 3-story house, even though they're kind of low windows. So I'm just trying to explore this. In general, I like the idea of the basement because it's kind of free space, as you're pointing out, and I agree that the building code can take care of the concerns that some people have raised about water leakage and stuff. That's not for us to solve tonight. But a row of windows at ground level, it starts, the visual impact of that, I don't know if we've really thought that through yet. So I'm not sure
No, that's
I'm
fair.
totally
And,
comfortable
in
with
general, I do have a reaction here. We're at the tail end of a 2-year-long process. We haven't been involved that long, but there's a lot here. This is meaty stuff. So, in general, I think we should slow down a bit and explore some of these things. I just do. Yeah. So to address this particular point, I feel that, if you see basements around the country, you don't see windows in the front. I don't know if there's any planning restriction against that, but it's general. I don't think anyone wants that on the front of their house.
Yeah.
Anyway, you see windows down the side and in the back is what you do see. I'd be fine saying no windows on the front of the house. I don't think I've never really seen a basement like that anyways.
Right. So that may be a solution, but that's not something we've sort of worked into the plan yet. I think a lot of the feedback we're getting on the neighbor impact on each other, this wouldn't be a big issue for them. It's not blocking light or air or a view of neighbor. So the streetscape, it's a streetscape issue, not a neighbor issue.
Yeah.
Now, I also like the idea of, if someone was inclined to build a basement, to encourage them to do so. And I'm not good enough to know whether it's 1 foot, 3 foot, 18 inches. I'd welcome a recommendation from staff, but I would support some relief off grade, and or hearing why that's not a really good idea from staff, and also exclude that from FAR myself.
I like that.
So the city of Atherton, we were just involved. Go ahead.
I can explain. The town of Atherton has done a lot of studies on basements. At one scenario, a basement could go all the way to 5 feet within the property, side property lines. So they really pulled it in, and basements are limited to under the footprint of the main building, and they're limited to no more than 2 feet at the finished floor of the first floor above grade. And then they handle the light and ventilation, and they escape through light wells. You really can't have it through, 3 foot. I don't know that would meet a fire code for an escape, and it wouldn't bring enough light in there to meet the building code requirements. So it's 2 feet above finished floor, and that's measured to the finished floor of the first floor. And usually you see a house has a couple of steps up. So that's how it works in that community.
Well, those are useful guidelines. I like the idea of not letting somebody hollow out the entire area of their lot for a basement. Somebody would probably have that idea. And the 2 feet, maybe that's, maybe we're getting in there. So are we going to be sending back our ideas for the staff to develop into something we can vote on more easily next time? Is that where we're headed?
I think that what, as suggested by the city attorney, I think you're getting somewhere, at least on 2 issues, you're very close. And so what we'd like to do is continue to move forward. Mm-hmm. We don't need to come back. We can just insert what you've said tonight and put it in an ordinance form. So what we'd like to do is see if we can get to consensus on these issues this evening, and you're getting very close here. So we'd like to continue to move forward. So one suggestion by the city attorney was to take a straw poll, and perhaps a straw poll could be taken on that last point, if it's okay with the chair.
Yes.
So is there a motion?
Sure. I move to exclude basements up to 3 feet above grade from the floor area ratio, provided the basement is entirely under the footprint of the building.
So excuse me, can I check, is that 3 or 2?
I just proposed 3.
Thank you.
So just through the chair, when we do a straw poll, it doesn't need to be a formal motion in a second. It's just someone puts out an idea and then the chair kind of determines whether there's a consensus on that particular item to be incorporated in the later full motion. And the reason for that is that the record would be very confusing having multiple motions on parts of the recommendation of the council and parts of the ordinance. So what I'm suggesting is just, is there a consensus that the basements not be allowed with a 3-foot height above grade, and then you can move on to the next consensus effort. So that's be my suggestion.
We understand that the overall height of the house is still limited to where,
Yeah,
without the basement
proposed
issue.
change to that.
So,
Yeah.
so I agree with your suggestion.
Does anyone want to speak against this?
I'm
And
fine with 3,
I am too.
as long as it's under, like you said, as long as
We're
it's.
in agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and under the main body of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Didn't even consider that alternative.
Finally.
We'll take
What's
a win.
next?
Can I propose to reintroduce staff's prior proposal regarding rear lot setbacks? And I think this idea of a 20-foot first floor, 25-foot second floor, from what I've heard from many of the residents, that would encourage this backyard space that feels like separation from neighbors and also encourages backyards. But that, we haven't talked about it. I just wanted to put it out there and just see if there was support or not for that idea.
I support that, I agree. I support that.
Likewise.
I carefully balancing the impact of that swishing the house upward, but I think the backyard space is pretty highly valued, and the light and the air. So pushing it that way, I would like to see the 20 and 25 for the second story.
I would just like to briefly ask staff, was there any particular reason we left that out?
Only because we were not directed to bring that back by the Planning Commission.
Okay. And are there any concerns from staff?
No.
Okay, I support it.
2 wins.
So the porches, I like the idea of not counting some porch area because it does encourage nice design features, and it's imagining people sitting out on their porch seems like a nice thing. As they get larger, I start to get a little more worried, and so if suddenly you have a 30-foot square covered area, then that could start to have an impact on the neighbor in a way that we're not anticipating. So I like the idea to a certain size, and so if we came up with a square footage, so the porch up to X square feet, it doesn't count in the FAR calculation, and then beyond that, it does. So we're giving some room, but not infinitely. And something on the order of a modest porch. I don't know, maybe we need to get feedback on this, but a modest porch to me seems like 6 feet by 12 feet or something would be
I would kind of a thing to address before that is what's currently proposed by staff is porches and covered patios. And I love the idea of more front porches. I think that's a great design element we should encourage. I'm not convinced at all about covered patios for all the concerns that have been raised about them.
your backyard front. Is that what you mean?
I think it's the concern we heard, it'll get glassed in and called a room over time, which I think could definitely happen. And if it's covered, it's already under the roof line. I think it is imposing in a way. So, personally, I would like to see a exclusion for a front porch, a covered front porch, but no exclusion for covered patios of any kind.
If we are able to do it that way, then I'm less concerned about the square footage thing because it doesn't seem like it's going to get out of hand this easily. And in addition to what you were saying, I think specifying that it's a ground level porch. I mean, a second level porch starts to sound like a frat house.
Yes. Yeah, as the staff, I think, proposed 18 inches. I think thinking about guardrails or perhaps, but I think front porches are front porches. So I think a front porch that is equal to or below the level of the front door is acceptable, even if that's more than 18 inches, right? I mean, there's a lot of homes where that's 2 or 3 feet up.
I agree that it's level with the level of the
Front
first floor
door
of the house.
or below.
Yeah, something like that,
below.
or within
Yeah.
range.
I don't want to play the devil's advocate here, but in the matter of covered porches or covered patios, a lot of people have awnings that are retractable. Where would that fit in? Do you have a solution?
I don't think that's a covered patio. I think that's a deck, and we should talk about that next, probably. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it would seem that the covered ought to be a permanent structure. You know, if it's retractable, I would have, you know, there's something special about sitting out and listening to the rain for about 15 minutes, and then you want to go back inside, but not sitting in the rain is a nice thing. If you do it under an awning, that's okay.
As far as the size of a front porch, I could go either way. I mean, a front porch can only get so big, but that said, plenty of planning commissions have probably died on that thought, right? That no one could be that ridiculous with a front porch, and then we'll see a really ridiculous front porch.
I wouldn't know how to come up with a number on the spot, though.
You know, I dug into it just enough to know that the recommended depth of a front porch is 8 feet. So then the question is, how wide should we allow it? And 250 total square feet occurred to me as a decent number, because that allows up to what, a 25-foot wide front porch, which is generous. I mean, you know, maybe 200 is the right answer. I don't know, but at least that did put a bound on it, where I think 8 feet by 25 feet is not too crazy. But, you know, here's yet another issue where we're sort of shooting from the hip here without a lot of input or study or what have you.
Throwing that out for broader input, but
Yeah.
I think it's too radical of a. If we have a limit, then it limits the impact. And
Well, 100 square feet sounds reasonable to me.
how many? 250?
No,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I said 100. I meant 200.
Oh, 200.
Yeah.
Yeah, 200 seems like you could do a lot with that, and yeah.
Shannon?
Like there's consensus on that issue as well. And we're taking notes, and we'll read these back to you when you complete.
I think David raised the idea of the need to have the flexibility for the one-car garage option in a wider variety of footprints. Can you reiterate? Was it you? Can you reiterate?
I'm sorry, can I just jump? I apologize, but on the garage issue, I'm sorry, the front porch issue, right now it says open on 3 sides, and I would want to change that to only has to be open on 2 sides as part of this, because you often see a front door recessed from a garage or what have you. Yeah.
Agree.
So just to recap that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have consensus on excluding from the floor area ratio covered front porches, not patios, up to 200 square feet that are at or below the level of the front door.
And through the chair, I don't mean to confuse things, but the porches are not included in FAR. It's lot coverage, so I just want, okay,
I
good.
meant to say lot coverage.
Okay, just checking. Good.
Yes. Okay.
And then the question about garages, because the majority of lots are 60 feet and under, most lots would qualify for the single car garage. As you get to be bigger lots, people I think are going to be less interested in, or there's less interest in doing that. They have more square footage available to work with, So I'm not sure it's very, we could give it as an option for everybody, but it doesn't seem like it's very applicable for the larger lots.
If it's just an option, does it matter though? I mean do we matter if a big house has a one-car garage? I don't know.
Yeah. I think the substantial part of our decision is in the 60-foot and under lots. That's where it's going to matter most. So I'm fairly neutral on the larger lots, whether we allow one-car garages. I mean, I don't know. As going forward, maybe have two-car garages is not going to. Why do we need to require two-car garages on larger lots?
I wouldn't require two-car garages. If someone wants to build a one-car garage, I don't see why we should limit them.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to, instead of owning your car, you're going to call it on your computer, and things can change over the next 20 years, and so
well, there might be houses, homes with just one cars and lots of bicycles, but I wouldn't want to put a mandate on it.
So I'd be fine with just having it be universally applicable as an option with the two-car wide width driveway.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if someone wants to design a one-car, I think most people with a large house want a bigger garage. I think it's a natural problem, but I don't see a problem with a one-car garage as long as we are requiring that 2 parking space area in front of the one-car garage like we are.
Yeah, I agree.
The one wrinkle I just noticed as I was going through the code is right now, because we actually, the wording is just a little different, I will say, on that one car in the, it's basically requiring it's stating there's only one parking space is required, but the driveway has to be at least 20 feet wide. So, I don't know why is there a reason we don't want to just say 2 cars out there?
A metric, just to have a metric, because then you might get into an argument. Well, I got a Mini, and you have a Suburban, and you got, So it's better to have just a measurable thing that we can apply that's universal.
And I agree with at least 20 feet, but I guess I would want to say 2 cars because that's our intent here, is that there be room for 2 cars.
And generally, in our code, what does it say now? Is it 10 feet? 9 by 18 is a minimum size in our code currently.
But
we can specify in our code elsewhere or we can just leave our code alone because I think it already specifies the width of a driveway. Is that right, Lisa Costa Sanders?
Well,
okay.
The issue is, I think we mandate 2-car garages now, and then each space has to have this driveway in front of it. So that's why we get the width today.
Yes.
We're now saying 1-car garage.
Yes.
So now we need something new to specify. You need a 2-car width in front of a 1-car garage. And I guess I would just be, since it's our intent that there's room for 2 cars, I guess I would say, if you choose a 1-car garage, it will have a 2-car wide driveway in front of it, at least 20 feet wide, if that's the right number.
That's fine. Yeah, that's in the code currently, yes. Under the proposed code that's what we've written in there.
Well, the proposed code actually states 1 car, but in a 20-foot wide driveway, and I just find that kind of odd and confusing. And in fact, it introduces a little wrinkle later in the code where you're only allowed a curb cut in front of a parking space. So you could be like, so 2 cars wide, but only 1 space, you only get a curb cut for 1 space. It's just, we mean 2 cars, so I guess I would want to just say 2 cars there, and then it's very clear, and the curb cut's not an issue.
So then technically we're saying we're requiring parking for 3 cars, and that's different than the old rule of 2-car parking.
But ironically, unless maybe with some hillside lot, we're talking about 4 parking spaces is the current requirement, so.
I'm good with that. If we specify 2 cars, it assuages the concerns that people might have. Whoa, you're pushing cars out into the street. So this will make it very explicit. You don't have to explain. We only said 1 car, but really there's room for 2. It's a lot of arm waving to have to do that. So I think it's more clear for people to understand. Okay.
That's fine. If there's consensus, we'll go with that.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Would you say again, I'm not quite sure what you're saying. I mean, I want to make sure that 2 cars fit in front of there, but are you saying that, I mean, because 2 cars can be 2 very small cars or they can be 2 very large cars, and without a foot, without foot being specified, are you saying take away the foot altogether, or just say 2 cars and a certain foot?
Right now, the proposed change says 1 car at least 20 feet wide, which is just kind of confusing. I would rather say 2 cars at least 20 feet wide.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
That's fine.
Good clarification.
The point of grace period was raised. It's somewhat of a nuance, but it strikes me as wise and useful for people that are in transition or working now. And I think there was a comment about 6 months being too long and 6 days probably being too short. Maybe I'd ask staff, do you have a view as to whether 3 months, where people are in the cycle now, 3 months from the approval, do you think that that gives people enough time to react, or is that actually, does that open doors for things you'd prefer to not handle? Or, yeah.
Well, one example that we recently can share with you is when the city adopted a new commercial linkage fee, we determined that it would only apply to projects if they weren't otherwise deemed complete. So once the new rules went into effect, if you had a project that was deemed complete, you wouldn't be subject to the new requirement. So for projects that are currently being processed or submitted, or if they are submitted and they get to be deemed complete before these rules would go into effect, they could proceed under the current regulations. But if they were under review and otherwise not deemed complete and these rules would go into effect, then they would be subject to the new rules.
So what if someone's spent 6 months working on a design and has been back and forth with the planning department and with the architect and has spent $45,000, $90,000, I don't know how much it is, but I imagine it's tens of thousands of dollars. I would have a hard time telling them that, sorry, you just threw away tens of thousands of dollars.
We don't, staff does not begin the deliberations on a project until it's deemed complete. I think that's, I mean, although there's some pre-work that's done, it doesn't come up to the Planning Commission or get considered for issuance of a permit until it's deemed complete.
I thought that there was back and forth between the architect and the planning department.
That can happen, but that's before it's deemed complete. There's information that needs to be provided. So there is a line where once I think what the staff is saying is that's a line they're comfortable with. It's because it's been deemed complete. That means it's reached a point where it can be considered as complete and all the findings and everything else can be made one way or another. Now that doesn't mean that it's the final product. It just means that it's ready to be processed. And keep in mind that even if you recommend tonight, it's going to be probably almost 60 days before this ordinance becomes effective. So there is time between when you're reviewing it now and when the city council is going to approve it. It has to go through 2 readings at the city council, and then it's effective 30 days after the second reading. So it's not going to happen right away. So if that helps.
Don't want to be overly stringent for the reasons that were raised, but those time frames that people certainly have a heads up. And looking at it from the other angle, a speculation builder could drop in 5 monster homes when the word is out that they've got 6 months if they're gonna squeeze these things in and make it happen. Just get the forms turned in, and they'd be under the old rules, which we. So I think what we want is if somebody's legitimately been working to get something in till now, maybe they need some grace, but we don't want to put out a call for last chance for Monster Homes, 6 months. It would be a dangerous advertisement.
And just to be clear, you could pick whatever you think is a reasonable time. I was just trying to explain staff's recommendation.
And I'm sorry, what would staff's recommendation be on that?
90 days would be
90 days.
reasonable.
I'd be comfortable with that.
90 days from when the city council passes it. So really, it's
Like 180 from now, roughly, probably.
yeah, I would be tighter personally, just because a speculation builder could easily use that 3 to 6 month window to put something in.
I mean, just realistically, though, I mean, it takes a couple months to close on a property. No one's gonna. I don't know. I would go with staff recommendation on this, because otherwise I'd be shooting from the hip completely.
Yeah.
So that's 90 days from, you said 180 from today, and you're saying 90 days from from city council.
We're saying 90 days. I'm just pointing out, based on Greg's explanation of the process, that's probably roughly 180 from today.
Okay.
But it's the 90-day from effective date.
Yeah. Okay, I can go with that.
Okay, I'll go with
Yeah,
that.
me too.
Okay.
One of the things that I wanted to see was on the notification, a sign in the yard saying that, well, do we have public notice signs in the yard? I know I've seen public notice, right? I mean, as far as notice, like a sign, proposed sign.
And our code doesn't specify that at the moment.
I think we ought to consider that, because there's a lot more people driving around it, and I bet you there'd be a lot more people attending meetings if they knew that things were going on. So I would recommend that we add to our notification not only the 300 feet instead of 150 feet, but also some kind of, I don't know what the right size of sign, but it's a yard sign or something to let people know that there's actually something going on.
My question there would be, and I agree, I mean, right now there's 2 construction projects on my street. Some of my neighbors know I'm now on the planning committee. They're like, what's going on over there? I'm like, I have no idea. It's kind of embarrassing. But but yet I think, to what effect is a question that has to be asked. So I think right now we require notice when it goes before the RDRC, because, okay, now they can come and be heard at a hearing. What does it mean to give notice of a project without any additional hearing involved? What's the recourse? I mean, what are we asking the public to do? And I'm not arguing against it. I think we should tell people and be more open. But what is what do we create when we give notice but no hearing?
I'm okay with just starting out, right? Making the notice for something that's going to go in front of the RDRC. If we want to make it bigger than that, I don't quite know how to build that,
Yeah, I agree.
to your point. But I would at least see it if it goes to the RDRC, where people can show up as a public hearing.
Absolutely, but I also heard people say they just want notice of projects adjacent to their property, which is totally reasonable. I guess I would ask staff, what does it mean? To what effect is it to give notice to people when there's no RDRC review?
It would create very significant issues, because people would then complain to the city, and the city would have no recourse with which to regulate any issues that come up or complaints. So there would be growing frustration. Hey, you notified me, but then you have no way to change. Yeah, there's no due process, right? So that would create a very significant issue, and it is not recommended.
Okay.
It is, though, I think it is a good idea if it does go to the RDRC, then there's a recourse.
Yeah. But if we're already providing notice out for 300 feet, what does a yard sign do?
Well, there's a lot of drive-bys, right? That they may not be, maybe it's, maybe there are 2 blocks away or whatever from a monster or, a would-be monster house, depending on what we do with the FAR. But they're not part of the regular notification area, but they'd want to show up at a public meeting. I would think that, I think that's reasonable. I think that there's value in it anyway. We don't all, I'm only 1 vote of 5, so if we don't all want to do it, then that's fine. But
I'm not opposed to the notion, but then we quickly get into the business of what has to be on this sign. Does it have to have pictures? Is there a website link? Like what?
is there I know I've seen notice of public hearing all over. Can we use the same thing or something a little larger on a standard real estate size for sale sign?
Yes, that's
That's what I would do,
reasonable.
'cause
And one of the other things I think it does is a lot of times people will say, I was never notified, even though we sent you notice and we did it, but you didn't get it because it got thrown in the trash or got lost or whatever. So that happens a lot. And so this is sort of a stopgap for the folks who, either it's misplaced or lost or whatever. At least when they're driving, they may not get it in the mail, but they see it in the yard.
Are RDRC applications already a matter of public record?
Yes.
So we're not opening up we're
How
not
many
exposing
people
new
look
information to
how
the
many
public.
people look at
It's
newspapers?
good it is, but yeah. So I would support what you just said about having something akin to the public notice information content on a sign in front of the house.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to think about how, the size of the sign and there's some issues with that. But basically the sign should say what the public notice that's being mailed out says. It should be exactly the same thing. You shouldn't add any additional standards for the notice on the sign. It should be exactly the same notice. And if people mosey by and they see a sign, they can stop their car and they can look at it. It doesn't have to be a big sign. And the reason I'm saying that is because we actually have our sign ordinance actually limits the sign area that people can have on their property. And if we force them to have too big of a sign, I'm thinking that we might have an issue there. So I'm just saying the same notice. It can be on 8.5 by 11, or you can make it a little bigger. But I just, as long as I like the idea, of a sign, it's just I don't want to over-regulate that component of it. It should just be the same notice that people receive in the mail, really.
What do they receive in the mail?
Well, one of my neighbors recently, I was within 300 feet, surprise, surprise, and it's just a notice of what their general project is, and
A few paragraphs of description.
it's on a page, isn't it? It's on a page that just describes the project, how big it is, what they're proposing to do in general. My neighbor, their house just happened to be over the threshold. It was a very small addition, but I'm just saying you get something like that, and if the object of this is to have a wider net and as Al said, to allow people who, for whatever reason, the notice didn't make it through to them in the mail, or it was inadvertently thrown out, they'll actually see it. So especially if it's next door or something like that. So.
Okay, I support that. I suppose the staff will round out the exact specifications in accordance with the broader guidance that we've just, the level of detail that we've established. So we don't need to talk about days and distance, positioning of the sign or anything.
I'm generally supportive. 8.5 by 11 seems kind of small, but anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, the content can be that, and I think you could. I think you could put in the proposed ordinance that you're recommending to the city council that staff have discretion on setting the size of the sign, or you could have a particular standard. It's just, I don't want it to be too large, but it should be large enough so people know what the sign is there for. So
To not to exceed the sign ordinance, right? So staff's discretion
that's
not to
100 square
exceed.
feet, so we don't want to do
Even in
that,
the front yard?
but we do want it to be in the front yard. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of a standard on the fly here, but visible from 10 feet away or something
But aren't
like
there
that.
like two different sizes of real estate signs? Because up in our HOA, we have very limited. They're barely bigger than your 8.5 by 11. Then there's the bigger ones, which are more like that. And it seems to me like that there is sort of like a standard that the real estate offices.
There are for real estate signs. Yeah, I believe there is a standard, yeah.
So I'm just thinking.
So maybe we could research and incorporate, if that's the intent, that the smaller real estate sign that people see on some lots, we could find out exactly what that is, and maybe it's 12 by 12 or 12 by 15 or something, or inches, and we could incorporate that into the proposed ordinance that the city council is going to see.
I didn't mean that one to be so difficult. It was supposed to be like the easy one.
I want to thank Shannon for raising that. I think it addresses lack of inclusiveness or notification that some of the community have said, and I leave it to staff to make a recommendation on the best way to implement it. So great idea, and need some help to put it in practice.
Okay, there's general consensus on that, I believe. Is that correct? Okay.
I support it, yeah.
In lot coverage, I think we're on to lot coverage now.
Leave as is at 50%, right?
Yes. So lot coverage was 50% to leave it as is. Their consensus on that?
Yes. It hasn't changed. I did have one question. Our code right now today is a little vague on this. Are decks included in lot coverage?
Only if they're greater than 18 inches from grade.
Okay.
What happens on a slope, even if you've got a couple foot slope, and a lot of even the flatter area lots have a foot or two, right? So you'll be above 18 inches.
The hillside ordinance has its own special provisions for decks and those types of features.
I'm thinking, though, even just some of the gentle sloped lots, just go up Britton Avenue by Cordilleras, and you'll see some slope. So you'll get a deck, 6 inches at the back, 24 at the front.
The other concern is
John,
just,
can you say, do you have a bias of in or out? Is which?
I think, a deck does not, a first floor deck does not increase the mass of a house. It can improve the living area. I don't see it.
Chair, I think I might have a quick answer. If the deck is unroofed and unenclosed, it is not included in lot coverage. So, which most decks seem to be.
And I guess I would just add to that, and equal to or less than, or equal to or lower than the main living area of the house. I mean, we don't want unlimited second floor decks, I guess, but this is lot coverage.
As they get higher, there's the potential for greater impact on the neighbors, I suppose. But terrain, it's a dicey.
Yeah, and I would add that I would clarify that, but provided that they're less than 18 inches in height at the surface of the deck. So there is that limitation that you were just referring to, Commissioner Roof.
I seem to recall, just to help this along, is that the 18 inches is the line where a railing is required under the building code. So it becomes more like a structure, a permanent structure attached to the house, and more like lot coverage if it's over 18 inches and requires a railing. There's bulk and mass associated with it when you have a railing, as opposed to just something that, as I think you're contemplating, is on a single level house on a relatively level lot. The floor plate is about a foot above the backyard patio, and you might want to just extend that so you're at one level. That's the ones that don't count. Those don't count now under the current code. But if you have a slope and all of a sudden, at the edge of the deck, you're out there 10 feet and it's 6 feet off the ground, it's more like a standard deck. You have to have it engineered. It's got, it's a lot more intrusive structure.
I think this is on the table, though, because we're trying to find ways to get people happy on their first floor, right? And to the extent we add this is lot coverage. So if we count backyard decks as lot coverage, then we're going to force more house up onto the second floor to the extent they still want a deck. So that's why I think this is something we should consider. My other more practical concern is that an awful lot of houses are that kind of 3 to 4 feet off the ground, just, a couple stairs walking up to the main level. And I don't know, they don't get a deck, it seems kind of